Welcome to Complexity Made Simple. My name is Paul Allen. Today we're going to take a look at a case study from one of my clients. Hope you enjoy it. Okay, let's get straight into this case study. Case study 3, component swapping. This is a tool that isn't particularly traditional to the Six Sigma toolkit. Personally, I'm not a fan of having a traditional toolkit. I just have a toolkit that solves problems, so I will often use lean tools, 5S, etc. to solve problems. This particular tool, component swapping, isn't traditional, but it is a great tool when you have this particular problem that this particular company has, which is a finished item, a fully assembled item that has an end-of-line test and it fails the end-of-line test. Component swapping is a great tool, and it's a tool that really answers a question that the Six Sigma toolkit cannot easily answer. So let's get into this thing, take a look. Here's the finished item. This isn't the finished product that we're going to look at. It's actually a pump made by Charles Austin Pumps. But the pump goes into these coffee machines. I'm sure you've seen them in various conference centers. And here's the problem. The pump is failing the displacement test. And now we have to answer this question. It's failing the displacement test. Is it the assembly process that's causing the problem? Or is it the parts that are causing the problem? Because unless we can answer that question, we will go to the wrong place to try and look for answers. And again, as I said earlier, component swapping is a great tool to do this. Whenever I've used component swapping in these situations, it has often taken me, a little bit like you're going to see in this case study, straight to the answer in a very simple, easy to understand way. Now here's the traditional Six Sigma approach. This is the approach I would typically advise. We would go straight to the process. Process flow, cause and effect. The cause and effect diagram is going to identify all the variables in the current assembly process. We are going to check the measurement system. Is the measurement system okay? Is it telling us lies? We would do an MSA in order to do that. Once we've found the variables, we are going to identify them with a C, an N, or an X. C means they are under control. That would be good. N means they are noise or not controlled. Typically a bad thing. X means we'd like to understand them more, and therefore we are going to experiment on them. But these two here are usually the ones that we concentrate on, and we turn the N's into C's as we can using standard operating procedures, and then we see what happens. That would be the traditional approach. But because this is a finished assembly failing an end-of-line test, the first thing we have to ask the question is, well, is it the process or is it the parts? Here is the process. 2 workstations. Looking fairly messy, so looks like there's plenty of opportunity to get this process further under control should we need to do that. But before we step in, probably 5S is going to solve this problem, by the way, if it was all about the process. Before we step in and do that, we're going to do a component swap, and it's going to answer the question, is it the parts? And which part is it, by the way? Or is it the process? Here are the parts. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 parts in total, although the component swap only swaps out 7 because these two get riveted together, and we don't want to keep breaking the rivets, re-riveting, breaking the rivets, re-riveting. That's not a practical thing to swap out. So we're going to leave those assembled, and we're going to assemble those as a little sub-assembly, or swap them as a sub-assembly. And that's a much more practical way to proceed without creating any problems, constantly reassembling the components. Now here's one of the key things about component swapping that's very important. We are going to select two samples. We are going to select what's known as the best of the best, often known as Bob. We are going to compare it to the worst of the worst, often known as Wow. So what we are doing, if we look at the distribution from the displacement test for a second, and we put a spec on this thing, what we are doing, rather than looking at a good one versus a bad one, anywhere either side of the spec line, what we've done is deliberately gone all the way over here and all the way over here. We've gone and selected Bob, and we've gone and selected Wow. And what we've done is created a huge big signal. Created a huge big signal between the two samples that we're going to use. Now that enables us to keep the sample sizes low. We've only taken two pieces. It's very rare to take such a small subset in order to find your problem. This is only possible because you've deliberately selected Bob versus Wow. Now, before we take the samples and do any swapping, however, we need to do this test that decides whether the problem lies with the parts or the problem lies with the process. And we're just going to do a very simple thing. We're going to take Bob, here it is, we're going to strip it down, rebuild it, and retest it. And of course we get a little bit of shift, we get a little bit of noise, just 1 point in the case of that test. We're going to do the same thing with Wow. So we're not going to do any swapping. We're just going to strip them down and reassemble them. We get a 2-point shift in the worst of the worst sample. Hardly any movement at all, which is great news. Whereas the signal, this big difference between the pair of them, is what? 80, more than 80 points. So the signal, big D, as it's known, is 80 points. 80 points large, if you like. 80 points the difference. The noise, 1 or 2 points. That's little d. When you do the ratio, the signal is 27.5 times bigger than the noise, which is fantastic. It beats the rule. It needs to be 5 to 1 at least. And what that's telling you is the problem is with the parts. The problem's in the parts. Now you can proceed with the component swap. So here are the results. You can see the 7 parts that got swapped out. The body, the 2 end caps, the diaphragm, the PCB, the eccentrics, and the adapter plate. And here's Bob. Here's Wow. And now what we're going to do in order to make this a little bit more visual and easy to see is we're going to put it on a graph. And here are the results. Just to point out a second what these are representing, Bob and Wow. They are samples from either end of this distribution. The best of the best is up here. The worst of the worst is down here. We've swapped the parts out, and what we're looking for is complete reversal. Think how far these parts have been moved. So although they haven't shifted fully to the same place, they haven't gone all the way to the same part of the distribution, think about where this result has come from. It's come from all the way down here and been moved all the way up there by having the diaphragm swapped out. So it's very easy to see what the problem is. The problem lies with the diaphragm. That is what's driving the good and the bad result massively. In this case, the diaphragm happened to be made on site by this company, so we could go and visit the process very simply. So ultimately, of course, we're back in Six Sigma country, really, because now we're back looking at a process. It's just not the assembly process that we first looked at. We're out on a moulding machine, and the moulding machine is making the diaphragms. And it was very easy to see what the problem was once we got out on this machine. Down here, look, are some little shavings, little bits of rubber that the operator has created. And he's created them with this little tool here. What's been happening is that they've run this machine. They haven't done any proper, official, routine tooling maintenance. The tool is getting in a worse and worse condition, and gradually it's deteriorating and it's producing flash inside the rubber diaphragm, which means the pump won't work properly. So instead of solving the problem, which is tooling maintenance, they've given the operator this rework tool here, which he can slide inside the diaphragm and he can use to cut the flash out of the diaphragm. But of course, in cutting the flash out of the diaphragm, what he's also doing is taking more of the diaphragm away than he should do. And of course, then the diaphragm isn't performing properly. It's not sealing properly in order for the pump to function. And the pump, therefore, is failing the displacement test. And that pretty much is the answer. They are going to now do some tooling maintenance on that particular product, on that particular tool, and they're going to solve the problem. And whenever people do component swapping, they often say to me, is that it? Is it that simple? Well, obviously, we were lucky when we went to the moulding machine that it was that visual. But in terms of finding the component that's got the problem, when you use component swapping correctly, when you have a fully assembled component, a fully assembled product failing its end of line test, component swapping is usually a brilliant and simple way of solving the problem. Yes, that quickly. It really is that quick. Hope you've enjoyed the case study. I'll be back with another case study in around about a month. Hope to speak to you then. Case study. Drink tea and read the paper. My latest book covers all the principles that I cover in this video, this case study, other videos on my site. And if you really want to know how to make Six Sigma world-class engineering, Drink Tea and Read the Paper is the book that you should read. Six Sigma is just a new name for world-class engineering that's been around for almost 100 years. From the greats, Stewart, Deming, Duran, Taguchi, they were all around before the phrase Six Sigma was ever invented. And all the principles that's covered in Six Sigma, all the tools that are covered in Six Sigma, all belong to these guys. Go learn about them, drink tea, read the paper. Put in Lulu RC and you should get a 25% discount. I look forward to receiving your support. Well, hope you found that useful. If you've got any questions on that particular topic, or indeed anything that you're doing in Six Sigma that you need some help with, drop me a line. Hope to hear from you soon. Subscribe or drop me an email, and I hope to hear from you soon.